Hi everyone, welcome to the Good Design Podcast. My name is Emmanuel Mole and I have my co-host.
Hi everyone, my name is Ini. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, it's been a very wonderful week for us here. Today we have a very interesting episode to give you all and an amazing guest. I've really been reading about him all through this week, and even before this recording, I was diving into one of his products, and this is going to be a very insightful field episode. So I would allow Ini introduce the guest and we'll dive into the topic.
Okay, actually, I think he's the best person to introduce himself, wouldn't you say? On today's episode, we've got Tom Kerwin with us. Hello, Tom.
Hello. I was saying when Emmanuel was introducing the guest, I was thinking, this guest sounds good. Who is it?
But anyway, it is lovely to have you here with us on the podcast. And there are so many things that we can say about you. We can talk about all of your early experimentation work. We can talk about the incredible pitch decks that you're the author of, which I think for me still blows my mind because, yes, that deck has been very helpful for me in my career. And to finally realize, hey, it's Tom, it's really incredible. And so I will let you introduce yourself. It's your journey. So tell us, Tom, how did all of this awesomeness get started?
Messily, I think, is the thing. So it's really hard. I think in today's world, I was just interviewing someone earlier and they described their career path as squiggly. And I thought that's about right. I started as a coder and then I went to university and studied engineering. And I thought this would be good, get into computer science. But I spent all my time building websites and writing music. And I did my first usability test in 1999. And that, I think, was probably when I was like, oh, hang on a minute. I don't know enough about how things work to design things well yet. Because every usability test I did, I'd realise, oh, that stuff that I think is intuitive, it's not. And I'm rapidly able to make things way better and create good designs. Took that into doing classic web design agency. But was still never satisfied because it was still really subjective. And I'm sure you've come across this. Clients or bosses who have particular opinions about what design is good and what's bad. And designers who have strong opinions about what design is good and bad. Surely the way we can figure this out. And I came across A/B testing in 2008, 2009. And I joined conversion rate experts and really went deep into split testing stuff. And learned a lot there that what I think is going to work, what the client thinks is going to work, what other people on the internet thinks is going to work, it doesn't work half the time, more, goes wrong a lot. But learned a lot of skills from that then took into a bunch of different startups. Then I started to come up against the limits of A/B testing. And you've probably come there too. Amazingly powerful for a tiny fraction of things. And also doesn't always necessarily work. And I came across, there's a resource that I'll share straight away, Andrew Anderson and his site. And when I first read it, it's called testingdiscipline.com. When I first read it, it made me angry. I was like, he's saying that things that I hold dear in terms of design and research and all this sort of stuff actually isn't that important. And the way that we do the statistics and the way that we design experiments is actually not very good for getting really good results. And it really annoyed me. And I wanted him to be wrong. And then I had to accept that he was right. And it was like the sort of wool being pulled off my brain, coming to a whole new way of thinking. And from there, I started to get more into the idea, I think, of antifragility and how can we do our work in a way where we're not trying to find out that we're right. Here's our brilliant idea. Tell me how good I am. But instead, it was bringing it into what we did with usability testing back in the day as well, I suppose, which was just, no, I know that this isn't right. How can I find something better? I know that my opinions about what is good and what is bad are wrong. How can I find out what reality will tell me? Then I came to the limit of what Andrew Anderson was thinking about and the limit of what you can do with the mathematics of A/B testing and started a journey into complexity. But I think we can leave it there for now.
Yeah.
Is that a good background?
Yeah, that is a very good one. Honestly, it. Like, thank you. And yeah, you've just mentioned and touched on your first usability testing Epiphany, right? A/B testing Epiphany and all of that. All of this epiphanies, can you dig into those? There's a story that came up in our intro session around Comic Sans, like two very separate things. I wouldn't have.
Oh, yeah.
Let's dig
Yeah. Yeah, Comic Sans and an epiphany for a designer. What's going on? I do remember, I love a quote, which is, if you love Comic Sans, you're not a good designer. If you hate Comic Sans, you're not a good designer. It's understanding that things have utility in different situations. And this is a story actually from Andrew Anderson, and it's something which I've then gone on to use sometimes when I'm interviewing designers for jobs. Share this sort of hypothetical scenario, except it was a real scenario. So it's a website which is delivering a service to people that is an unambiguously good service. We're not tricking people into buying something they don't want. No scam here at all. So the more people get through this website flow, the better for the people themselves. It's delivering better service. Now, the designers on the team, they'd come up with a new design that included a beautifully chosen, well-considered font, and they wanted to put that live. Now, our hero in the story, Andrew Anderson, he's a difficult man. So he demands that you can't just test one thing, you have to test, and this is his phrase, he talks about the idea of testing a broad beta. Not one idea versus the control, but multiple ideas in multiple directions, trying to cover the largest array of possibilities, not trying to guess what's right and then see if you are. So he said, well, then we're going to test a whole range of font choices. If we're testing fonts, we'll test your font variant, we'll test some other font variants, we'll test including font variant number 5, which in this case was Comic Sans. And they ran the test, and in this case, Comic Sans performed 80% better than any other variant. And so you bring the data, and the designers were really, really not happy. Not happy at all. And I think this is the thing. Can you work through that and accept it? And the first thing that happens is you try to explain it away, or you try to justify it somehow. You try to rationalize it. And from Andrew's perspective, that is the mistake. You're trying to fit that into your worldview and make it okay, and make it not feel bad to yourself, not feel like, actually, this proves that maybe I don't know everything about the world. So that was a big challenge.
I love that. There is a follow-up challenge to that, right? I absolutely love that. That puts things into perspective and says, oh, maybe you got to take a pause to your approach or your belief of what you've thought was the right way to go. On the other hand, though, we know that A/B testing has grown in in popularity over the years. And if you think back to when Facebook really began to share and push hard on this, and suddenly it grew like wildfire amongst different tech companies.
Mm-hmm.
What you've described about just pushing the boundaries, and it's not just control versus variance. Like, yes, we know there are multivariate tests, but typically the appetite for risk, and this, depending on how important, for example, the flow is, right, it becomes ultimately watered down if you try to test way too many things at once. So where is the space for going down that route, or this example where you've just given like test everything? What is the issue?
And that's a really good pushback, and I think there's two angles you're covering there. So one is, absolutely, there's not space to test everything. And again, I'd point you at Andrew Anderson. If you want to do properly good A/B testing, then he has got the resource you need. Now, you will need political power to push it through, because it will not make you any friends at any level. It'll make the business tons of money, and it will put a big target on your back that everyone wants to get rid of you. Because first, you've got the thing of, you need to know where to test first. And it's one of the big arguments he makes. Most people are testing things in places where it's pointless to test. And I saw this again and again. I remember testing through a long flow about getting loans. It was something in financial services. And we spent ages testing on a landing page, and it just made no difference. And then I did a tiny test, which was broad beta, multiple different variants, and several things at the same time. Actually, it had to be multiple things at the same time. in order to get the result. But that created a huge lift and made the experience better for customers and made it measurable for the business. It's an interesting, we could go into lots of beefs about the way A/B testing is done, because you're right, watered down is the word. And I think this idea that you can't test multiple things at the same time is wrong. And I think people often want to test one small thing at a time and imagine that then you have control over the output, or that you can make variables independent, and you can't.
Oh, I love that phrasing, because I know how much it was a back and forth. I remember, previous role that I had where it was, if you make too many changes, how do we know what contributes to the lift? And that's a question that you hear a lot of times. And there's always been that niggly in like, yes, but that is the point of the test in a way, right? Once we begin to try to control every single variable to it, it's almost like, are you not wanting to see success? Because now we spend incredible amounts of time with inches of progress, and majority of them then fail. So what's the point?
They do. And then you get into the maths, which is the mathematics of it. The variance on your site may be plus or minus 2% by default. If you're testing tiny little things that have less than a 2% impact, you're not going to pick that up. But if you, and then you might have one thing that has a 1% impact, another thing that has a 0.5% impact, another thing that has a 0.5% impact. But when they're all done together, collectively they have a 10% impact. But you never find it because you're testing them one at a time. And I would say change the level of granularity. That's pretty much, if there's one trick that I've got, it's about change the level of granularity, which is the bigness or smallness of what you're looking for, that simply. So if you're thinking, we need to change the headlines on a page, well, maybe you need to go broader than that. Maybe you actually need to change the whole page and just do 6 different, wildly different pages and see, firstly, does it make any difference? If you do 6 wildly different pages and they all perform the same, chances are that page doesn't matter. So that's one. Now, there's another angle which I was mentioning, and you touched on, I think, beautifully, which is the emotions of your colleagues matter a lot as well. And if you come up with the variant that is going to win, but nobody in the company likes it and nobody's proud of being in this job anymore because this is now our website, it's not going to last. And you haven't really found something that is sustainable over the long term.
Gosh, what a very hectic job we've all picked, isn't it?
Why on earth have we done it? I mean, what makes you love it? Why do you want to do it?
Well, we're going to save that question for another day, Tom. But yeah, I think the key takeaway here is also that push and pull that you find with like trusting data over intuition. And I guess my question to you is, how much of intuition really does come into the assumptions we make about design? Like, if the goal is, which many times today, that's what the case is, we try to force the test into proving something that we know. Is it truly then an assumption?
Oh, it's all assumptions all the way down.
I get that, but
yeah. The dangerous assumptions are the ones we don't realise are assumptions.
Yeah, sure.
The ones where we think it's just the way the world is.
So how do you balance that trust your gut, intuition versus the data? What's the balance for both?
In reality, like, the way we interpret data is entirely driven by the stories we tell ourselves and the intuitions we have. So there is no objective reality exists, but we are really bad at perceiving it. We're always seeing it through a filter, which is our own worldview and our own stories about what should be happening, what is happening, what other people are like, and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah. Would you then say, really, at the end of the day, if the way we interpret data, just forgive me for playing devil's advocate here, right? If we're all just interpreting data according to whatever stories we tell ourselves, or even hidden agendas that we have as different stakeholders, So what is the point?
Oh, it's a good question. I ask myself that all the time. Do we just give up?
Oh my gosh. Okay, let's go back to the...
That took a dark turn. It definitely is. I think there is a sort of, underlying story which tends to exist in a lot of businesses, which it's not fair to call this like the MBA story, because MBAs learn about things like uncertainty and complexity and stuff like that in their course. But it sort of seeps in this sense of we can control the world. There are a set of levers, and if we could just know what the levers were, then we could control exactly what the outcomes would be. And it's in the kind of the business analyst, the MBA side of the business that I find I tend to come across those people. And I think that story drives a lot of what happens in a lot of businesses. Now, the weird thing is, if you go to a group of like founders and they are in the mess of figuring out an early stage company, they're not running it like that. They're not doing careful, well-designed experiments, etc., etc. They are running about trying to figure stuff out. And if they're lucky and they are able to adapt fast enough, they find something that works, and then it starts to build and get stabilized. And then somewhere later down the line, it sort of flips into this thing where
you gotta be careful with every single flow.
Yeah. And that's not a bad thing, because what they've done is they've brought something that was purely improvisational, that was them figuring it out on the fly and using their own personal charisma and whatever it is to make sales happen. Now we have to turn that into a business, and a business has to be repeatable and predictable. Great. So repeatable and predictable, you can't then just be making that up on the fly. It has to be a flow that is repeatable and predictable. And it's a flow that prints money. And as we know from our testing, there are many more ways to break something than there are to make it better. So it does make sense to have that small c conservatism creep in. The challenge is when if you want to innovate, if you want to have step change, if you want to grow, that means letting go of the predictability, because it's not going to be predictable. Good management is all about predictability. Good innovation is all about unpredictability. Good management is all about certainty. Good innovation is all about uncertainty. So there's this tension at the heart of everything. And the challenge, I think, and this gets at your question from before, there's a dance between the two. And you can't let either side lead all the time.
This reminds me of that story about Native Americans, that they've got a folk story about how everyone's got two types of monsters or wolves.
Two wolves in them, isn't it? Yeah.
The good and the bad one. Which one are you going to let win? So basically got to keep them both in check. Okay, so let's look at your framework, the one that you've called Multiverse Mapping, right? Can you explain what that is and why and how does it serve as a behavioral prototype before you actually build a product?
Multiverse mapping. I'm very glad you asked about that. I've been teaching it regularly in these intro to multiverse mapping sessions, and it takes me about an hour to get it across to people. But it's starting to, that's a lot quicker than it used to. So it's sort of coming across quickly now. Fundamentally, my belief, and I think I've seen this over and over again, is your success depends on the behaviours of people and systems that are outside of your control. And that is pretty much always true. There's a bunch of stuff that we know how to do, that we can do, that is repeatable. All those business systems that we've already set down and we've made safe and repeatable. Great. But now we want to do something different. We're going to do something new. Well, now there's a bunch of stuff that we haven't done before. We're maybe going after a new customer, or even just a new, like the same customer, but someone who doesn't convert yet. We're looking to see, can we get them to consider us as well? We might be going to a different market, creating an entirely new product for existing customers. All of these sorts of options. There's something new there. And in order for us to be successful, we need them to buy it. We need them to go through a marketing funnel, to arrive at our landing page, to hit the buy button, to give us their credit card details. There are all these things that have to happen. Now, the multiverse map is a way of saying, modeling this in terms of a multiverse. So rather than just trying to average it out and say what the average person will do, instead we're going to look at the extremes. So first we'll look at our very favourite person in the entire world, like the person who best gets it, who does everything we want at every step along the way. Well, what do they need to do in order for us to be successful? We're thinking about our design, our plan, our technology, all this sort of stuff. Well, first they need to find us. How are they going to find us? Where are we going to be that they stumble across us and our ideas? And it might be in our existing product. It might be in an existing channel that we have. It might be a new channel. At that point, they then need to choose us. So they've found us, they've maybe looked for some more information. At some point they have to choose us. They have to say, yeah, I'm going to give it a try, or I'm going to pay for it, or I'm going to spend some energy to actually figure this out. So that has to happen as well. How is that going to happen? And we're going to break this down in detail. And at this stage, we're doing all of this with just green post-its laid out in a linear story. So they see a post on LinkedIn and they read the post, and then they tap through to our profile, and then they hit the button at the bottom of the profile. Like, that's a rough example. That's what we're doing. We're telling the story from their perspective, putting in their shoes. How would they describe it? So we're not describing our modules and the way that they move through our funnel. We're describing the headline that they see, the button that they press, etc., etc. So they've chosen us. Now they're going to have to use our thing. So they're going to have to actually do some stuff. What do they do? And at the end, hopefully, they're going to have to get some value out of it. And so we describe, what's that like? How does that change their life? And I've not found a simpler way to describe a product end to end than that. You're just telling a story of what they need to do at every stage. What we need them to do, rather. And it's, I describe this as what one person sees and does. WAPSAD. They see something, they do something. They see something, they do something. That's all the internet is, really. You see a thing and then you hit a button or you type a thing in. Great, that's the first universe. We're now going to add in all of the bad multiverses to this story. So every step along that way, something can go wrong. They cannot see the LinkedIn post. They cannot read the LinkedIn post. They cannot click through to our profile. They cannot carry on. And at every step you can fail. And so what we're looking at there is all the multiverses where it's the people we don't like, the people who've ruined our success. And this is brilliant, because now we've got a more accurate picture of the extremes that we're looking at. And we can start to say, well, what are the kind of propensities we expect? How many people who see a LinkedIn post do we expect to actually read that LinkedIn post? And we can start putting numbers on this. And that's the first trick I use with this before we go any further, is you put 1,000 people at the start, and then you just say, how many people get through to the next step? How many of those get through to the next step? How many of those get through to the next step? And I've killed ideas in half an hour, because we realised that if you put 1,000 people in at the start of this, by the end of it, you've got someone's left toenail. There's just such a high attrition because there's so many things that nobody's likely to do, actually. And then you realise, well, we'd have to have the entire population of the world using this to make any money from it. That doesn't seem realistic, and we can kill that idea. So that is the fundamental way that a multiverse map works. And I'd say right now to your listeners, if you are listening to this and you've heard that and you think, yes, I can see that in my head, it's a row of green sticky notes and a row of orange sticky notes underneath with arrows joining them all up, and you can go and make that and start working on it, then go and do it. You will find it's amazingly transformative. There's loads more you can do with it as well, and we can get into that too.
Yeah, I mean, when you were saying it, there's a lot that was just mapping in my brain, right? And I was kind of thinking of around it being sort of close to something like a journey mapping.
Yep, it's exactly.
But I know there's a universe to it, and that's why it's multiverse. Yeah, so let's go down to, apart from the framework itself, what really matters to like a company or to a business? Like, how does this framework helps a team to identify key metrics or even pinpoint area of uncertainty in the product in itself, like from this framework?
Cool. That is a brilliant question. That's exactly the question that we need to get to. So what I found this framework does, or this little map does, is it joins the gap. Because there's pretty much always, I've seen, a gap between the senior stakeholders, the executive leadership team, etc., and the goals that they have for the business and the goals that they're telling you, the worker bees that they have, and the way that the workers think about it, where we tend to jump into designing screens, designing sort of architecture diagrams, etc., and thinking and having conversations. We tend to start debating things and discussing how we're going to achieve this technical thing versus that technical thing. What I noticed was happening again and again is when I talked with the senior stakeholders, we were talking in such lofty terms that nobody could actually understand what we were practically going to do about this, or how this was going to work with real people in the real world. And when I talked with the technical teams and the teams who are doing the actual work, it just rabbit holed into technical details that later we realised, well, actually, we don't need to do that at all. We're doing something else. And we've spent 3 hours just debating how to achieve this thing in one database row. And that sort of stuff happened all the time. Once I got the multiverse map out, then we could hook the stakeholders' goals into the map as well. So we'd stick them up above the map on some purple stickies usually. It's just my convention. So these are the goals for the project. We need to enter a new market, or we need to, whatever it is they're trying to do, increase things by 8%. The sorts of things that stakeholders like, I'm sure you already know, in your business. And then what we could do is make this multiverse map with the team. And as we're going, capture their questions and their thoughts about how we could do each step in blue stickies underneath. So we've got the technical stuff, the work of the team right there as well. And so now we've got this sort of 3-layer map where we've got the business goals at the top, we've got the actual to-do list that we're going to work on at the bottom, and we've got the multiverse map in the middle saying, well, how does the work we're doing at the bottom connect up to the goals at the top? So now the stakeholders can start to see, this is how design helps me get what I want. This is how the technology helps me get what I want. The other thing you start to be able to see is, well, it can't be everything to everybody. It can't do these two contradictory things. And when you're doing that in conversation, this is something I've started talking about recently. So tell me if this isn't making sense to you. When I went round and talked to stakeholders, I would find that they talk in terms of that they have user stories going in their head. And they'll tell a story of a user doing journey A. And that's all wonderful. And then we'll be talking about things, and then we'll say, well, there's this challenge here. And then they'll jump to user story B. And user story B is also coherent in itself. And then we'll talk again, and then they'll jump to user story C. And that's also coherent in itself. But they don't all add up. You can't have all of them at the same time. But humans are brilliant at this. We can do this all the time. We can adapt contextually without even thinking about it. It's completely unconscious. We don't notice we're doing it. Then we come and we wonder, why can't the design just do the sensible thing that I can see in my head that's obvious? Not realizing the sensible thing you see in your head is changing every time you think about it, and you don't realize. The designers are weird because we tend to build a coherent model in our head and then test all these ideas against it. And we start saying things to stakeholders like, well, you can't have that and that. The stakeholders, of course you can. You just put 2 buttons on this page, and then you show them a page with 400 buttons on it. So, is this working for you?
It's funny, I just had a conversation regarding that today. So
yeah. And I found, so you can go and work up the screens and show them and try to persuade them and teach them about UX, like, cognitive load and all this Fitz law and things like that. Doesn't work. They don't want to learn about UX. It's like a plumber coming and trying to teach you how to select the right wrench. You don't care. You just want the leak to stop in your house.
It's a great analogy.
It is, honestly. And right, so beyond just multiverse mapping, right, you've also mentioned ideas around speech to signal system.
Speed to signal, yeah.
Yeah, speed rather to signal, thank you. And then there's another called Antifragile Prioritization, which you referenced slightly earlier. Can you outline what these are and how they complement each other in it?
Oh, yeah. We'll start with anti-fragile prioritization because in a manual, you also touched on that with this areas of uncertainty on your multiverse map. So once you've got this map that you've made with your team, one of the next things you can do is start to identify the places where you have the most uncertainty. So where are there places where no one's done that before? This is a step which is entirely new. We don't know how to get people from LinkedIn to our landing page, for instance, or we don't know how to do that technical thing at all. And there are various different methods which I teach in the course, or they exist as well in the deck if you're cunning and you look through. Once you've got a heat map of where the uncertainty is, I've found that people then tend to head towards it. So if you haven't mapped it and made it visible, people tend to want to ignore it because uncertainty is really unpleasant. And we can't just go and resolve all of the uncertainty because there's too much of it. It's everything outside of our tiny bubble. And so you need to give people the granularity again, here's a thing that we need to figure out. For instance, the developers need to connect to an API that they haven't connected to before. That is therefore somewhere we have a lot of uncertainty compared with the API we always use to doing our login stuff. We don't need to build the login system again until we know that everything else works. Instead, we're going to focus our efforts on the place where we've got the uncertainty, the new API. So very easy, the developer can go and do a spike and just see, okay, what is in this API? Does it work the way we expect? Does it work the way the documentation says? There was a literal project that I worked on with a team. We made a multiverse map of connecting to an API that was brand new from a third-party service. And we mapped out what we wanted it to do, how we wanted the system to work for the users. And then we identified this uncertainty. Developer went off, did a spike, came back and said, the documentation is 100% wrong. It doesn't do anything like it says in the documentation. And we had to change the entire user experience. But because we'd done a simple map instead of big designs, it was a matter of minutes to change it. We did it on the first day of the project instead of near the end when we tried to hook it all up and we have to change all the designs again. And we could just turn it around like that. So that is an example of going to the uncertainty and using the uncertainty to benefit you rather than to blow you up. Because now we were able to make something that worked, that met the deadline, and that ended up being a better design for our situation than if we had made the design and then had to bodge it with something that didn't work in the end. That is anti-fragile. Anti-fragile just means you benefit from uncertainty rather than being blown up by it. Okay, so if we add together your multiverse map and this idea of anti-fragile prioritization, and then we go out and do the probes that we need to do to get the signals we need to make the uncertainty less uncertain, then I would say we are following a speed to signal system. So one of the tricks that is there is I don't try to persuade anyone to do additional research, additional discovery, additional overhead. When we make a multiverse map, we're doing the planning we have to do anyway. When we're identifying the uncertainty and doing spikes, we're doing the spikes that we're going to have to do at some point anyway. We're just doing them today. And the other sorts of signals we go and get tend to be demand signals. So if we're going to sell this via adverts, for instance, or by emailing out to our existing customers, well, we're going to have to do that anyway. Often we'd be waiting until it's launched, now it's live, we built it for 6 months, now we have to scramble and figure out what to put in the emails. I say, well, no, why don't we just do that today and see if we send that stuff out in an email, do we get the number of responses we're expecting? That way we're getting speed to signal. We're not doing anything extra. We're doing what we had to do anyway in a different order.
Yeah, I love
there
it
you
too.
go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one aspect that really stood out to me was having to be able to avert any form of loss of energy or loss of effort when you could have actually mapped out some of this experience without even being at the whole screen. That's a whole lot of time saved and energy saved when that is kind of put in place. So for teams new to this method, right? What are the first step, like baby step, you recommend for them to start to ideate or to validate their growth ideas using these tactics?
That is a brilliant question. And it's going to depend a little bit on the team and their ability to be okay with looking stupid. I think that is the superpower you've got to draw upon. Now, if you're okay with just hearing this, saying, yeah, okay, now I know how to do, I think I know how to do this. I saw it in a cartoon, and you're happy to then go out in front of a group of people and start making a map, then I salute you, and you're an excellent person. You will go far. You may not go far in this job, but you will go far. I think you can absolutely do that. And I was speaking with someone just the other day who absolutely just blew me away. He'd done my course. I make a course, and it's like 4 hours of videos which teach you how to do this and all of the ins and outs and the wrinkles and everything you need to know. And he'd done the course, and then he'd just gone and done this first time live with a genuine client, and the client was absolutely blown away and delighted with it. And I looked at what he'd done. It was better than the multiverse maps I make. It was ridiculously good. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. If you are like him and you can just get it and go and do it, then fantastic. But not everyone is. So there is a safer, easier way to do it, which is start small, start quiet. Now, one option is come along to one of my intro to multiverse mapping sessions. You'll find them from my profile. I talk about them on when I'm going to do one, I mention it on my newsletter. So there's ways to get there. But if you don't want to do that, that's fine. You can learn this by yourself. I mean, I did. I figured it all out by myself. You can too. Start with just one friend. So sit down, someone who's friendly in your job, and say, hey, you know that thing that we did last week? What if we just did a multiverse map of it? Can we figure out how to do that? And if we had done it, what would that have helped us do differently? Would we do anything differently, actually? And you can just practice. It takes a bit of practice to do. But yeah, you can just practice it quietly with one other person, then maybe with a small team. And you can build your skills up slowly that way.
I love that. Okay. One of my favorite situational tactics from the paper deck is what you call the pain x-ray.
Yeah.
And it was a very inspirational, it's the inspiration behind one of my greatest experiments.
Oh, exciting. Tell me about your greatest experiment.
It's actually a super simple one, but it was more that it was a fintech company. We had been looking for the longest time into figuring out how do we talk about our headlines? Like, what do we say? We had been brand led for so long, and it obviously was not connecting with many people. I mean, like, it's not that we didn't have customers, we did, but the kind of success we were looking for through our homepage was just not landing. And so I dug into the psychology. I'm like, let's do this. Did a bunch of research, read far and wide, and then my, the PTEX entered into the scene. And from there, I thought to myself, hang on a second. We definitely have been sounding very pompous and self-absorbed, especially on a product that is as sensitive as loans that are supposed to help prevent debt spiral. So for something that sensitive, it made no sense for us to say, look at us, this is what we do. It was going to make more sense for us to dig into the research, really understand what the pain points are.
And another really difficult thing with that market is the people who need it most don't want to admit that they are in that situation.
Exactly. So in leaning into the pain point or the pain x-ray, it was literally that. How do you mirror their pain in a way that for them, they're like, it's not even a matter of admitting at this point, like, this is my problem. Let me learn more about this. And it was a series of other experiments down the funnel as well, but just that headline alone was responsible to, I think, over 50% increase.
Damn.
So, yeah, it was very good. Thank you.
It's funny that you just even explained the pin x-ray.
I know. I feel like I've answered the question I was going to ask him. I know.
It's good. But, so the pain x-ray, the trick there, and I will give massive shout out here. The origin here is Amy Hoy and her method Sales Safari, which on the surface of it sounds incredibly simple. You just go to online watering holes. So places where people are hanging out already talking about their sorts of issues. So I imagine you go to Money Saving Experts Forum, for instance, or to Reddit. Subreddits are really good for this about various different topics, and you can just read through and detect what the issues are. Now, what she found, I don't know, this is the reason why she teaches this stuff, and what I found is you can go and read all that stuff and come away completely none the wiser, just completely miss everything that's there, and say, oh, there's no insights there. And I think often we make the mistake of thinking the insights are just going to be lying around waiting for us to pick them up. Oh, look, and they look like insights. And you go, oh, there's an insight, we can have that one. But they never do. It's always, I really like, have you heard of Louis Grenier? He does Everyone Hates Marketers.
Yes.
And he's done a book recently, Stand the F Out, which is really fun. I would say, look, if you're interested in the marketing side of stuff and positioning, he's got a really good way of thinking about it. And he talks about it's like foraging for truffles, so or for mushrooms. You have to kind of go. You don't know where they're going to be. It's not like in a farm where you know exactly where things are going to be. You just go and pick them. You're going to have to go hunting around, and there's no map you can follow. And you're going to have to look at each mushroom and check: is this a good insight or is this a poisonous insight? I don't know. You've got to engage your brain a little bit. But that's what Pain X-Ray is all about. You're going to learn how to read between the lines of the words and phrases your audience use so you can uncover their hidden pain, showing you the genuine opportunities to innovate. And it's realising that most of us try to hide our pain. We're not even aware of it. We don't want to be consciously aware of it. We don't want to show it, but we can't avoid letting it slip out in clues. And I guess that's what you were looking for, is where are you seeing with... Often it's subtle. Often it's in debates that reveal their fixed worldview, something, or complaints, or humour, sarcasm, outrage, prickliness, or even just the word should. And just hearing those things, you know that there's something behind it. And then your game is to read between the lines and figure out what that might be.
I love
And
that.
that's it.
Yeah. Okay, to inspire other people to seriously pick up your paper deck, can you tell us maybe one or two more tactics or frameworks from the deck? Just like shuffle and draw.
Yeah,
Shuffle and draw.
she's still from it, yes.
Yeah, Emmanuel, I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you have one that's your favourite?
I told you earlier, I think the
Probe-based innovation.
pro-based innovation, yeah.
Love it, yeah. And that one, I mean, it's very relevant to everything that I just talked about, or we just talked through with multiverse mapping, is all that probe-based innovation flow. And it's doing the scientific method, sort of, but in a different order from what most people think it's done in, because I think most people are wrong. But that's a fun beef for another time. I'll share my favourite one, and the one that I think is the most powerful and gets back to this idea that we see the world through our stories, and that's Anatomy of an Insight. And the idea with this one is, this is really simple, and I use this with growth teams all the time. And there's an example of this on my newsletter, like on my Substack, so I can share that link afterwards if I remember. What you're going to do is, people tend to come with ideas, and so they come with an idea because they've seen a bunch of stuff in the world. That's how we tend to operate. I'm sure you've been here. A load of designers are sitting there going, stop bringing me solutions, stop solutionizing. I need you to bring me the problems. But people don't naturally think in terms of their problems, and they aren't good at articulating their problems in a realistic way. Instead, we've evolved this way. We jump to the first fit pattern match solution that seems like it's going to be good. And that's fine. I say, great, let's do that. So you come with an idea. I then say, put the idea down. Great, that's an option for what we might do. Now tell me what signals you've seen in the world. What have you seen in the world or heard, or what numbers are you looking at? What flow are you looking at that tell you that idea is a good idea? And so we put those signals down, and it might be a flow, it might be something somebody said, it might be some numbers, it might be a goal. Like, there's all this sort of stuff this is why this is supporting this idea. Then I say, okay, what story are you telling that connects that idea to these signals? Now, once we've got that story down, we can start to work. So the next thing we do is say, right, that story that we're telling ourselves limits what we can see and do in the world. So on more pink stickies, I use pink stickies for the stories, you're going to write at least 2 alternative stories that could explain those signals. And as you add those stories, you're also allowed to add more signals as you realise that you spot them. So this is hard without a real specific example, isn't it? But you tell one story about why this idea is the right one. You see the signals, then say, right, what else could explain those signals? So a classic one is, why is somebody not clicking on the link in our email? And you might say your first story is, because the email is poorly written. Or often the email is poorly designed. It looks like spam is the first story you jump to. And so your idea is, let's redesign that email, obviously. Okay, but now tell 2 other stories about why might somebody not be clicking the link in that email.
It could also be that the headline is not interesting enough for them to want to click into. It might look just as generic as 5 other 6 emails they get from an industry like yours.
Boom, spoken like a true copywriter.
Oh God.
And then that's good, that's a compliment. But yeah, so then so that's good.
It could also be that the action is just simply too much for them to take. What you're asking of them and the way it has been asked is just not motivating enough.
Love it. Yeah, so there's straight away we've got 3 stories, and only one of them means redesign the whole email. Now you've got 2 more options for action, because you're saying, right, the headline's not interesting enough. Well, we could write a different headline. or it might be the action is too much to take. Well, we could try sending them to a different place. And I've had a win where we sent them we just changed where the link went by one page, and it led to a 17% lift. Stuff like that. It happens all the time.
That is so cool. Okay, let's bring this into popular back and forth between product-led versus sales-led environments. Right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Is that popular?
Well, I think because PLG gained a lot of attention recently.
Yeah.
Then there was that other debate around, PLG is not the answer to everything. And then there's also, so for example, now I went from a completely PLG environment into a completely sales-led environment into now a mix of PLG and sales-led. And I think
Great.
Emmanuel was sales-led completely, and he took on the brave effort of trying to get them to a PLG. But yeah, from your perspective, Tom, we'd like to know, what are the common challenges and areas of friction that you see happening between how growth design differs in these two environments? Because I think there's also that potential to assume for new growth designers that growth design only happens in a PLG environment.
Yeah. I think you've just answered the question. The reality is, if you're doing growth design, if you're using something like multiverse mapping to make a model of how your growth happens and what you can change in order to improve it, then it's the same in product-led growth or sales-led growth or pixie-led growth. It doesn't matter. Like, whatever the growth motion is, if you model how it happens and then you come up with ideas for how you can improve that, you're fine. And you said it yourself. I think that's it. It's when we come to it, and I've made that mistake. I'm sure you've both made that mistake. We come to it thinking that what we are doing is all about building products, and we need to do it the same way that we've seen these other people on the internet do it, who are telling us all about their wonderful product-led growth experiments.
Yeah. Which is why we all should be talking about it on the internet. So it's not only one group of people, you know.
Exactly, but it's this thing as well of which I've seen, you'll have seen throughout your career as well, I'm sure, of it always looks much easier to copy something that someone else does that worked for them than to figure out your own situation.
Yeah.
But when you copy it, you take it out of their context where it works. Oh look, they've got a viral product where people just want to share it. Let's make one of those. Yeah, no, you can't do that with a financial product. It's not going to happen.
Exactly. And plus, I think the other thing I always tell people is what you see is only obviously what they've shared. You're lacking it just beyond just lacking context. You are lacking the truth.
Yes.
Of that experience on the back end.
Yeah, my God, that's a huge one. Because you're looking at their current state in an evolutionary process that's been going on for sometimes 15 years. And you want to know what happened on day 15. And you're seeing 15 years down the line, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And if it has been shared, there's another one I read, like, I can't remember the growth book it was in, but if there is a tactic that's been shared on the internet, in a book, in a post, it's already stale. Once you can read it, it's done.
That's a really good point as well. Yeah. Yeah, and it stops you then, but it goes back to something you said about earlier in this sort of the fear of changing things in case something goes wrong type situation. And you feel like you want to grab at these things which have been proven to work so that you're reducing the risk somehow. But you're actually only going to find what works for you by trying stupid stuff. But that is where it gets into this politically difficult sort of area. Okay. But again, then we're back at multiverse mapping for your situation. Come up with more options, come up with more stories. And what I found is I spent years, and I'm going to tell you, don't do this. I spent years trying to persuade people to be critical thinkers who could design good experiments and not get trapped by confirmation bias. And it didn't work. And evidence won't change minds. Argument won't change their minds. So don't bother. Instead, just create more stories, or get them to tell you more stories, get them to create more options, and trust that the options that feel good and that people are kind of like vibing with, they're going to bubble to the surface somehow. And then you're going to do those.
Good. I like that. I really love that. And that really answered one of our questions, which I won't go into again. So when working in large organizations, right? Yeah, as a designer, you want to be customer bias, user bias, right? So how do you balance that tension between your creative freedom that you feel aligns more with customer and the corporate objectives that does not really align, you feel it's cheating the customers? Like, how do you balance those two tensions here?
Well, that is, it's a very tricky path to walk, I'd say. It's going to depend on the organization. So you are constrained much more by the organization and its needs much more than the organization is constrained by the market if it's a big organization. Organizations can get away with doing bad things for a surprisingly long time and won't suffer repercussions. One of the dynamics that I think we underestimate, or organizations underestimate, is this non-linearity of testing. So let's say you're doing a series of A/B tests where you are making your service slightly worse every time, slightly more extractive of the user, slightly more unpleasant for the user. And you do the test and you see, no, there's no change. And you do another test and there's no change. And you do another test and there's no change. Well, at some point you reach a tipping point and you do one test and suddenly, boom, churn increases and everyone starts leaving. And you go, oh, that was the test that started it. And so you roll back that test, but the churn continues. Because it wasn't about that test. It was about the cumulative effect of all of these tests. And if you've ever seen like piling up a big pile of sand, you pile up the sand and then one grain of sand will trigger an avalanche. And you can't unavalanche it once it's happened. And you don't know which grain of sand it's going to be. So it's this idea of non-linearity. So it's very difficult to play this game of evidence. We're going to show you the evidence that this is going to cause a problem if you're in that sort of situation, because you can run tests which show actually the users don't seem to care when we make things worse, and you're going to get stuck. Fundamentally, what I try to do is I use multiverse mapping to show that, all right, we may not cause a problem in the short term, but if we say, okay, I'm going to go back to a real example. I taught this method at UX London last year, and in the workshop, one of the teams started working on a multiverse map for how people got in contact with their company. And they made the map, and I came over and said, this looks interesting. And they revealed what they wanted to do was stop people getting in touch. They had to reduce call center volumes, so they were designing a map to make it harder for people to call up. And I was like, oh, this is not user-centered. This is awful. But fine, go with it. That was their job. That was what they were going to get to keep their job if they achieved. They were going to get like a good appraisal, etc. Everyone in the company is much more influenced by what's going to keep them safe than by being nice to users who are on the other side of a thick wall and are sort of a faceless mass to most of us most of the time, which is the sad truth. So I said, that's fine, you do that map, but don't forget, when you get towards the end and the user can't find the way in, some of the bad universes that might happen on your map are, well, they go to the press. They make a campaign site that tells how awful you are. They give you bad reviews on this, that, and the other site. They churn as a customer. They stop recommending you, etc., etc. So capture the bad things that might happen. And what you're doing is just then exposing, all you're doing is showing. You're showing the risk that you're taking. You can't make the executives care about that. You can't make people not want to get their bonus. That's not going to happen. If your shareholders demand that you show 5% growth, and the only option people have at the moment to do that is to extract it from users, then that is what's going to happen. So then with your multiverse map, we go back to what I said before, your stories and your options. If you can help people to find an option that is better, that gets them the 5% growth, then you make that something that is available to do. If you just say we can't do that, what are you going to do then? That doesn't work with anyone. This plan is doomed to fail, let's not do it. Well, that has never stopped a plan in a corporate environment in the history of the universe. The plan has to carry on unless they can find a better plan that is easier to jump to and that they feel is less risky. then they're going to do it.
So for designers, in how you think about your work and your approach to things, right? What I'm hearing is also risk management, right?
Big
As-
part of it, yeah.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
big part of it for designers. How, and I'm sure this question, I feel like it's come up so much recently. We've asked nearly every guest so far, but in different iterations of it. What strategies in your experience can help designers just elevate their role in being able to go beyond, like think about your work outside the scope of it and how it interfaces with all of these stakeholders? So you're more strategic in your thinking. You're more strategic in how you present work within complex systems.
Of course, I'm going to say make multiverse maps, but there's it's layering on top of a multiverse map. So if you can multiverse map across that complex ecosystem, and you often you can find out that these stakeholders and then there's these people get involved. You can do multiple swim lane maps if you want to, with multiple roles doing stuff. You can do looping ones, however you need to make it to clarify what it is that's going on, you can do that. Now, you mentioned risk, and I've talked about uncertainty. Realize that in a lot of organizations, those two are seen as the same thing, even though they're not. So uncertainty just feels risky. Risk is risk. Risk is when you can put a number and a percentage and prediction on it. You can't predict uncertainty because you don't know what it's going to be there. And uncertainty is both scary and also generative. It's also the place where you're actually going to find the innovation that you can't think of today because you haven't been there to what's happening in that uncertain space. On top of your multiverse map, once you've identified these uncertain areas, which are also sometimes the risk areas, like we're going to spend 6 months building a product, what if nobody buys it? You can then say, you can go to your stakeholders with a very crisp statement when you've identified the biggest areas. And it's something like a pivot trigger statement, which is, we've got this plan to do this thing. Great. This is highly technical language I'm using. Got a plan to do a thing. We have identified that one of the biggest risks is that not enough customers will want to buy it. So we propose that we do a small probe, and we will think again, or we will pivot if when we do a small probe by sending an email to 50 people this week, if fewer than 10 people are interested in getting on the waiting list, then we're going to pivot. It's that sort of thing. And you're having that conversation where you're saying, we think there's a risk here. We have an action that we can take right now that is cheap, that we have to do anyway. And we've already thought about the metrics and the numbers that we need to see. And we want to have a conversation about what is going to be enough. What signal would be enough for you to see to feel that you're confident to carry on? And what signal would be low enough for you to see to feel like, we should probably think again. Maybe this isn't going to work. And now you're having a strategic conversation with that stakeholder. It doesn't always work. So you get one of about 4 responses. So the first response you get is, that's brilliant. That's incredibly strategic. Let's go and do it. Fantastic. You're having a strategic conversation now. You look good. You're influencing things. You can now trust that if the signal comes back bad, you're going to be able to rethink the entire project. That's exciting. The second thing that happens is they say, well, yeah, that's it, but there's a wrinkle. So you might need to change the numbers. That's not high enough. That's too high. We don't need that many, but we do need some. Or they might say, yes, but there may be a regulatory risk or a legal risk. We can't do it that way. You might need to think of another way to do that probe. The third thing is, actually, even if nobody buys this, we still have to do it. And there may be a reason they can't reveal to you, or they may just honestly tell you, we've promised this to a partner, or my bonus depends on me launching this exact thing by the end of the quarter. But actually, what all you need to know is these goals you've been set are not real. We have to do this regardless. Then there's the fourth thing to watch out for, which is when you're being set up, which is no, the strategy is good, the execution is on you. If it fails, it's you. If it succeeds, it's me. And then you need to start looking for a new job.
Noted. Filed away as soon as I see signals of that. You're like, yep, I remember Tom said it's time to find a new job.
But that's it. And I'd say, I think I've seen that lots of times. And if you can just jump to having those conversations, then great. I've seen very few people who can hold enough of a complete model without gaps in their head that they've built up with a team collaboratively to be able to do that. When you make the map with your team, stuff will come out that you weren't anticipating was going to be hard. Stuff will come out that you were anticipating was going to be hard that's going to be easy. And you're going to learn by making this map. Your team are going to build a shared model of what does this project's success depend on. And it's when you've got that shared model, you can start talking with the stakeholders. You can share that model with them, and everybody gets more strategic.
We are going to bring this to our last question. And honestly, this is now advice for designers regarding one, the evolution of growth design at the neck-breaking pace that the world is evolving at. And how do you continue to drive real impact? Like, yes, you've talked about the strategic thinking level, but how do you continue to drive real impact while staying grounded in design values and experimentation?
Cool. Okay. Yeah, we'll start with that one. So advice for growth designers. I think, like all practices, the practice of growth design is evolving. Growth hacking had to grow up. It was much too bitty and sort of hacks on top of stuff. And that's led to the existence of growth design, where it is more considered and there are teams who are sort of dedicated to this, or it starts to get integrated into every product team. And I think that is probably where it needs to go. Because as we move forward, this idea of growth can't be one-dimensional, can't just be hacks on top, and it can't be based on a rigid approach like A/B testing everything. We're going to have to be more flexible and more aware of complexity, uncertainty, things like that. And I think you're going to probably find more growth by finding ways to relinquish some of the illusion of control that you try to cling to. The other thing that's worth noticing is it is a really tough role at the moment from an ROI perspective, because the easy growth days when everyone could just throw ideas at the wall and get apparent A/B testing wins, which were never really true, that's kind of stopped. And so growth teams are expensive, and getting reliable results that are big enough to pay for your growth team is not a given. And if you are on a growth team and the results are not coming in, you're going to be on the chopping block when things get tough. And the growth and the innovation is one of the first things to get cut, because you just need to keep the lights on and survive until things grow again. So one trick is don't focus purely on growth necessarily, especially in the market at the moment. You might need to have a broader portfolio of skills and be able to turn your abilities to growth. And I think of it as like, do you know, can I tell a story about bees? Are we running out of time? So
Yeah, we're trying to wrap up for sure.
So this is, there's a model, we talk a lot about exploration and exploitation, but here's the thing. So you know bees, honeybees, when they come back to the hive and they do the little waggle dance to tell all of the bees where the source of nectar is. So scientists, this was a few years ago, were watching this and they figured out how the waggle dance works, and it's amazing. Like, it's so clever. And the other bees then pick this up and they go off to find that source of nectar, except not all of them. About 1 in 5 bees didn't follow the signal. They didn't seem to understand what this bee was saying. And at first the scientists thought they were just rubbish bees. But it turns out, no, they are vital, because if you just go and exploit the source of nectar that exists, when that runs out, you got nothing. So the other 1 in 5 bees, 20% roughly, were going and hunting, and a lot of them died. But some of them found a new source of nectar, and then they were the one doing the dance next time they came back to the hive. So about 20% of your resources want to go on stuff that is actually a little bit silly, like quite extreme, not following the dance, not being aligned with the overall company policy, but doing stuff that's a little bit different. You're going to have to flex that up and down, because when it's lean times, you don't have the energy to do that extra stuff. But that is what I'd say is a fair thing to aim for.
That is a wonderful note to conclude this episode in.
Yeah.
Thank you for the bee story.
Yeah. It's really a very sensitive advice, honestly. I don't. I was able to pick one or two things, but yeah, just go ahead.
Oh yeah, okay. So no, just it's been great talking to you, Tom. Tell us before we go into the lightning questions, tell us where we can find you, the Peep Decks, and I wrote your newsletter and your course, so don't forget.
Lovely. So our website is triggerstrategy.com. That's me and my partner. From there, you can find links to our newsletter, also to our podcast, also to videos on YouTube and resources that we put together. So that's a good place to go for pretty much everything. If you just want the Pip Deck, Innovation Tactics, that's at pipdecks.com, pipdecks.com. And then you can browse through their whole collection there. There's many excellent decks on there. I'm a little bit biased. I think mine is the best, but I would.
Okay, and where can we find you?
Me, so if you search for, I'm on LinkedIn more than other platforms at the moment. So it's Tom D. Kerwin or Tom Kerwin, or you can search for Trigger Strategy and you'll find me there as well.
Nice.
Awesome. All right, I'll hand over to Emmanuel to do the questions.
Yeah, so we lost the lightning. So good.
Yeah, it's get to know you now. Okay.
Lightning time.
All
I
right.
prepared these, so they will be
nice.
lightning.
Oh, hopefully. At the end of the question, we know if it's lightning.
Nah, we've already said there's no lightning. It's fine.
Okay. What's your top 3 products you use daily and you love?
Cool. This was a hard one. I was like, what? Are there any? Do I hate everything? My coffee grinder and V60 pour over is one. We love our daily coffee ritual and like really nice coffee and obsessive. It's a thing to nerd out about. So that's one. Next one, IA Writer, which is just a writing tool. So it's a note-taking tool. It's where I take all my notes. It's for Mac and phone, and it's just great. Really simple, and a very design-led company who've considered it very carefully. So I highly recommend that. And then the third one is actually a phone app to stop you using your phone as much, which I found fairly recently. It's called Refocus. And it's one of these sorts of app blocker type things, but rather than completely blocking it or trying to be too restrictive, it just adds a little bit of friction. And for us designers, it's quite fun looking at positive friction that just puts a little bit of an extra hurdle in the way before you go and check LinkedIn or whatever else it is that distracts you.
Nice. What's one design resource you keep going to?
This was a hard one because I thought, is this like a website or what do you mean? But I ended up thinking there are Slack communities. So it's communities for me where you've got the conversations happening and the people. And there is Growth Designers is a good one, I know, but I don't hang out there that much. I do hang out at Designer Hangout, is lovely. Growth Trackers, which is a sort of, I think it's invite only, but really good community. And then the Kerwin Slack, which if you can find it, there's a form. I'm a moderator there and you can ask for it to get in there. That's a whole world of complexity science and Kerwin, estuarine mapping, lots of cool stuff, which we didn't get onto. But my methods are all based on complexity principles.
Nice. 3 books you like to recommend?
This was really hard because I think there are about 200 books that went into innovation tactics. But I boiled it down to the three that you may not have heard of. So the first one is Kathy Sierra's Badass, Making Users Awesome. And if you want something, this goes back to something you asked earlier about how do you keep those design principles and how do you keep the user front and center. The fundamental argument is stop focusing on making your product more awesome, focus on making your user more awesome. And the product will take care of itself. And she does it's a really weird and interesting book. Really, really good. Highly recommended. So that's Badass, Making Your Users Awesome. The next one is Nobody Wants to Read Your Ish. I don't know if you want to keep this clean. But it's a book by Stephen Pressfield, who's more famous for The War of Art. But this was, for me, a more effective book. And it's kind of his story about how hard it was for him to get through to the point where he was writing screenplays that people wanted to make. It takes in stuff from advertising, all this sort of stuff, but it's a book length punch. It's just punching you over and over again, realizing that nobody owes you their attention, and you're going to have to make something that's good enough and interesting enough and cuts through enough if you're going to get anywhere. And I think that applies massively to the way we put design out for users, but also with your colleagues, with your stakeholders, with everyone else. They don't owe you attention. And the third one is Design Unbound, which is a design book, so not from the non-world of design. I struggled to think of the third one, but Design Unbound is about design for the whitewater world. And it is about this much more iterative, intuitive, signal-finding sort of approach to design. Rather than following linear processes or just making nice screens, it's much more aware of the systems around you. And that's by Anne Pendleton-Julian and John Seeley-Brown. 2 volumes, very good.
Yeah, nice. I think the second one really caught my attention because of breastfeed. I've read the first book, so I'll really check it out. What profession will you be instead of your current role?
Dance teacher. Which I do on the side anyway. So I teach Lindy Hop.
You teach what?
Lindy Hop.
Oh.
Which is it's a dance that originated in Harlem in the 1920s, 30s, and is like a Black American art form danced to old swing jazz music, and it is just joyful and beautiful and creative, and it's a conversation with your partner.
I love that.
Interesting.
Are you based over anywhere around Hackney?
I'm not too far.
Look for Lindy Hop East London, LDN. If you fancy giving it a go. So I used to teach with someone, Angela Andrew. Shout out to Angela Andrew, she's amazing. So I used to teach with her in London. She's one of the best Lindy Hoppers in the world, and she teaches in Hackney in just this little class, which is very welcoming and good.
What's your favorite food and movie?
Good. Too many options to choose from. These are both hard questions. The only restaurant I've missed since moving out of London was Chicken Sours. So if you don't know that one, it's 7 Dials, and there's this little like underground restaurant, Chicken Sours. They do Korean fried chicken and sour cocktails. If you order in advance, I've never had it, but I've seen that they do this thing, which is a whole chicken deep fried with like Korean spices and all this sort of stuff. And it's amazing. And favourite movie, I prefer to answer what's the movie you've watched the most times, because I think that's the more realistic answer. And for me, that is, I think it's still Monty Python and the Quest for the Holy Grail, because I watched that over and over again when I was a kid.
What did you call it?
Monty Python and the Quest for the Holy Grail.
Okay.
And it is...
It's an animation.
It has elements of animation in it, but it's live action. It was made on a shoestring budget, and it's a very weird film, but it's very, very funny. Closely followed, if we're looking at numbers, by stuff like The Incredibles and WALL-E, and then you're into animations. And that's partly from having kids, but partly just because I'm a big Pixar nerd.
Same. Okay. All right. Thank you all so much. And thank you so much, Tom, as well, for this very insightful episode. I hope for everyone who's listening, this has been as incredible to listen to as it has been for us to have this conversation with Tom. So until next time, everyone. Bye-bye.
Hi, guys.